And welcome to the fourth day of Interact Amsterdam Virtual Festival 2020. Hello if it's your first session of this week, and welcome back if you've been watching sessions over the last 3 days. Yesterday we closed the day with a fantastic session from Andrew Hinton, who is a designer and researcher at Honeywell Connected Enterprises. And it was talking about what we talk about when we talk about navigation. But today, before we start, please to get involved and say hello to each other in the chat. Make sure you switch your chat settings to panelists and attendees so everyone can see your messages. And do let us know if there are any audio issues or issues with the stream, and we'll try to get things fixed for you as soon as possible. But now, we're really excited for our first talk on this beautiful Thursday morning. This talk is Designing for Everyone. How can we prevent digital exclusion? From our Nomensa's own user experience consultant, Gabi Mitchem-Evans. In this talk, Gabi will explore what it means to be digitally excluded in 2020. She will illustrate who has been impacted and how, by sharing examples of where our new digital touchpoints and services are impacting people's well-being. Please do ask a lot of questions using the Q&A box. I will be asking these to Gabi at the end, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. So without further delay, I'll hand over to Gabi to begin. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you, Manuela. So hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to my talk this morning. So with so much change in our society due to the coronavirus pandemic, I've been thinking about some of the new design decisions that have been made in our communities. And today I wanted to share some of my own learnings and observations to help inspire us as a community to design more inclusively. So that's why I'll be talking today about designing for everyone. How can we prevent digital exclusion? So just to give a background about me, my name's Gabi Mitchem-Evans, and I am a user experience consultant at Nomensa. And my skill set spans user research, service design, and accessibility. I'm originally from Barry, South Wales, and I studied industrial design at Loughborough University. And that's really where I learned the fundamentals of what makes a good product or a bad product. And I think that's applicable to both physical and digital experiences. And if you'd like to follow me or chat further about any of the things I covered today, then I'm on Twitter, and I've also recently joined Medium to start writing a bit more under the handle of @GabiMitchem. So I'm sure you're all aware of the typewriter. And one of the first ever typewriters was invented in the early 1800s by an Italian man, Pellegrino Turri. And back then, if you were blind, you would have to ask someone to transcribe your writing for you, which wasn't great if you were writing private love letters. And he designed the typewriter so that his blind friend and rumoured lover at the time could communicate with the world in private. And the typewriter originated from a mismatch, where somebody experienced that exclusion and designed something to solve that problem. And as a result, the design has gone on to meet the needs of many more people, shaping the technologies that we use today, such as our phone keypads and keyboards. And what I like about this example is that it highlights that by designing for an impairment, you'll also be designing for a much larger amount of people. And although the typewriter isn't usable for everyone, for instance, if you have limited use of your hands, it was designed to increase the amount of people it included, and that's a great way to design. And this is an example I found just yesterday and really wanted to highlight. So this was a Twitter thread asking what's something that's actually exclusion that people pretend is inclusion. And the lady replied saying that you have to give 24 hours notice to ride a train, and there's only one wheelchair space per train. So if we reflect on what that means, it doesn't give anybody flexibility or spontaneity. And it also means that you can't travel with a friend who's also in a wheelchair. And I think this is often the sad reality of what inclusion means in our society today, and shows that we've still got a long way to go. So what do we mean by digital exclusion? According to a study, an estimated 9 million people in the UK are unable to use the internet and their devices by themselves. With the world becoming increasingly more digital, those who don't have digital skills are at risk of being left behind, and this is applicable across the world. In simple terms, digitally excluded people can be defined as those who are not able to use or do not have access to the internet or digital devices. And those who are excluded digitally are also far more likely to be disadvantaged according to many other social and economic measures. And ultimately, this is causing a digital divide between those who do have skills and those who don't have skills. So on the flip side, what does it mean to be digitally included? When someone's digitally included, it's more than them just being able to use technology. The internet gives us access to a huge amount of information and plays a big role in our lives. It gives us the ability to communicate with others easily across the world and at any time. The ability to access companies and organisations who provide vital services such as healthcare, financial advice, and utilities. It gives us access to accurate and up-to-date information and also access to cost-competitive goods which are only available online. And this is a diagram I first became aware of from Kat Holmes, who is a leading expert in inclusive design. She served as the Principal Director of Inclusive Design at Microsoft for 3 years and is also the author of the book Mismatch. And she explained that the meaning of exclusion quite literally means to shut out people who don't fit in the bubble and therefore cause them a physical or a digital barrier. And if I ask you to imagine that the objects on this slide are people, you'll see inside the circle that there's lots of little circles, and these represent people who look the same and have similar needs. The people outside the circle all look different because they bring different perspectives, experiences, and motivations. And if we map those those things that people are excluded from, it quickly becomes apparent why this is so important. Excluded people are missing opportunities and having compromised life experiences. And what we want to do as designers is increase that in circle to start including as many people as possible in our designs. And I think this is also a really powerful way of showing what we might learn from them. So thinking of that circle, what are the barriers to being inside it and being included? Research for the UK digital strategy shows that there are 4 main barriers to digital inclusion, and more than one may affect individuals at any one time. These include the access to connect to the internet and go online. So for instance, more rural areas may not have access to 4G or Wi-Fi. The skills or ability to use the internet and online services. Some people may not have ever needed the skills before now. The confidence and the trust to complete tasks digitally. So a lot of people fear online crime, they lack trust, or they just don't know where to start. And lastly, the motivation. So not everyone sees why using the internet could be relevant or helpful. And when somebody has the access, skills, confidence, and motivation, then we can call them digitally included. NHS Digital did some great work on digital exclusion and highlighted the sections of the population who are more likely to be digitally excluded than others. And as people, we tend to more commonly empathise with people who have impairments or barriers that we can see. For instance, with older people or people with physical disabilities. However, when you look at who's being affected by this, it is absolutely those groups, but it's also much broader. For instance, it includes people in lower income groups, people whose first language is not English, people without a job, people with fewer qualifications, or homeless people. And there's so many people affected by digital exclusion, but what does it actually mean for these people? To give a few examples, if we look at people in lower income groups, it's been proven that the most digitally engaged people are saving money. A study showed that they are saving over £300 a year on utility bills alone. And this means that not having these skills can in fact worsen someone's financial situation. And if we take older people, a study showed only 7% of over 70s are likely to have the capability to shop and manage their money online. And this group grew up without digital technologies, so a lot of the time they've not needed to learn them until now, but it's excluding them from communicating with others. For instance, my grandma lives alone and has not been able to join our birthday celebratory Zoom calls over this period because she doesn't have the skills. And if we think about people whose first language is not English, how many products and services do you use that rely on a knowledge of English? In 2011, 4.2 million people in the UK said English was not their first language. And if we think broader to Europe, how many people, for example, in the Netherlands, Spain, and France is this excluded too? Digital services such as Google Translate are one solution to help translate English design services. But without access to this, how much more difficult is life made? So I'm going to step into our persona of somebody in the lower income group a bit further to explore what the consequences of being digitally excluded really mean. And I stumbled across this case study where one mother in West Yorkshire couldn't afford to buy a laptop to have at home. And during lockdown, as I'm sure many of us relate to, she's needed to do her work from home and also help her children study at home too. And thankfully, in this case, a local group of volunteers called Digital Access West Yorkshire were doing amazing work in responding to the immediate need for families to have connectivity and devices during lockdown. They were asking for local people to donate laptops that they no longer need so that they could refurbish them and distribute them so that people could have access to the internet in these vital times. And this lady's quote really helped show how important this was to her. So since receiving our laptop, my family and I have been using it to study, which has been vital as lockdown continued and lessons moved online. Before that, I'd asked the school to send work on paper, or we'd try to use my phone. That was difficult, especially for one of my daughters, because she wears glasses and found it difficult to read on a very small screen. And I'm sure you'll all resonate with this because I can't imagine doing this presentation on a very small screen, and it just shows how important this is. So a lack of digital skills and access can have many other negative impacts on a person's life too. And this figure from Digital Unite says that 81% of people over 55 say that being online makes them feel part of modern society and less lonely. And again, loneliness and social isolation is something that I'm sure a lot of us can relate to during lockdown, let alone for somebody who hasn't had digital access during that time. So we know that this is important, but why particularly is it important right now? Well, living through a global pandemic has meant that we've drastically had to change our lives. It's changed how we interact with services, closed a lot of public spaces, and made us behave differently. But it's important to reflect on this, and actually I think there are some positives to this challenge. As researchers and designers, we have a massive opportunity to improve things. We're learning new ways of doing things, such as how to collaborate remotely and how to educate our children from home. And whilst we might not have liked the situations we found ourselves in, what can we learn from it? And what insights can we gain to make the situation better? Ultimately, we can only control what is in our control, but we can design to acknowledge this, that there are some changes that we can keep in mind. For instance, there's going to be increased internet reliance, and there's not much we can do about that. There's going to be new ways of undertaking everyday activities, and there's going to be a real need to upskill those who don't have the skills. And one of the ways we can remember that is to recognise that there's no such thing as that person. This bell curve is a really old idea, and it's not what we're aiming for when we're designing for inclusivity, because the average person is a myth. And when we design for something that we personally can use, see, or hear, it ends up working for people like you, but it actually ends up excluding a much larger group of people. And as the Microsoft Inclusive Toolkit highlights, exclusion happens when we solve problems using our own biases. As designers, we can seek out those exclusions and really use them as opportunities to create new ideas and inclusive designs. Another diagram from the Microsoft Inclusive Kit shows how many more people there are than just ourselves. Our aim is to increase the amount of people we serve. We want to be mindful about being inclusive, and actually that's really difficult as a researcher because we'll never have access to everyone who might use our product. We have to push for it because we want to learn more because it's important. And everyone matters, so it's not acceptable for our designs to exclude people. How have we been digitally excluded people? Let's start by looking at how we've been using tech. So from attending online fitness classes to getting on a bus, we now have new or enhanced digital touchpoints, which have been designed to either lessen our risk of contracting COVID-19, make our lives easier, or sometimes act as the only interaction point with the service. Things such as downloading an app or using a camera to scan a QR code have quickly become a replacement for usual person-to-person services. And if we revisit our persona within the low income group, how might our new uses of tech impact the things that they can do? For instance, if we take the example of FaceTime, if your child is using the only phone in the family to do their homework, then they're not going to be able to call somebody to catch up with their loved ones. And whilst some of these things might be out of our control, it's really important that we consider them. So I wanted to explore how the experience of visiting a restaurant has changed recently. And this is a service map from the BBC GEL framework. And here we're looking at 5 stages. So everything from browsing the menu, to ordering your food, to preparing your food, to having your food en route, to having your food served. And this map shows that there's lots of touch points where a chef, a waiter and a customer need to collaborate to deliver a successful service for everyone. And in a typical in-person service, we'd see the waiter deliver most of the customer interactions. However, with the need for safer, socially distanced services, new digital touchpoints have been introduced during the pandemic. And if we take a look at the customer layer and apply the digital touchpoints, it's obvious how inaccessible some of these touchpoints become. So to further illustrate this point, I personally visited a restaurant recently, and when I sat down, the waiter informed me that I could use the QR code on my table to order and pay by an app. And then he walked away. Now, as somebody who works in the tech industry, my initial reaction to this wasn't to be too surprised. However, I couldn't help but think of how this might have felt for other people. And the problem with this is that some of the new tech we've been using makes assumptions about users' abilities. Not having an alternative route to access the service is not good design, as it excludes people. And for somebody who wasn't familiar with this technology, they would have presumably had to inform the waiter that they didn't know how to use the tech and ask for a backup option, or potentially leave if they felt really unwelcomed. And I think that's where I believe there's room for improvement. One of the things I've learned is that by considering digitally excluded audiences from the beginning, you'll catch these issues earlier. You'll save yourself time, money, and additional work. And there could have been a few tweaks which would have made this a much more inclusive experience. For instance, an alternative offline experience could have been introduced where the waiter firstly asks if the customer is familiar with QR technology or not. This simple change makes it clear that somebody who's not digitally confident can still be supported and is more than welcome to use the service. And again, we're not going to be able to control everything. For instance, if the waiter hasn't been trained to think about these things, then we can't control it. But we need to embrace the fact that there could be challenge or conflict and continually think about how we can improve it. Another example of digital exclusion during COVID is banking. Every human needs money in order to survive. It's how we buy food and pay for somewhere to live. The way we access our money varies depending on personal preference and circumstance. But during the pandemic, there have been some changes to what we can and can't do. Some of you might be aware that many ATMs across the UK have been shut due to COVID regulations, and this is because it reduces contact and encourages social distancing, but also because cash use has massively reduced during the coronavirus pandemic, with many businesses now asking customers to pay by alternatives such as cards. Some banks have also closed branches due to COVID or have operated at reduced hours, with their main advice being go to our website or use our online banking. The problem with this is that online banking is not a viable option for everyone right now. Research shows that cash usage varies greatly by area, often more people relying on cash in some of the most deprived places in the country. Not everyone is comfortable with making digital payments, and we need to make sure that we don't leave people behind, because cash is still a really important payment method for a lot of people. And this really made me think, who are we designing for? Because sometimes we're not going to be the people using it. It's about the wider audience that might use it too. And if we think back to the barriers for digital inclusion, there's so many reasons why somebody might not be able to use online banking. For instance, they might just not trust to deal with their money online. And what I've learned through this is that what we're really asking people to do here is change their behaviour towards how they bank. We want them to do their banking online to reduce the virus spreading, but behaviour change is not something that can just happen overnight. The mental model of how someone interacts with offline banking is very different to online banking and is constantly changing. We need to make sure that these new ways of doing things are rolled out carefully so that the most vulnerable people in our societies don't get left behind. It's not always possible to directly translate an offline experience into an online one. And as designers, it's our job to make sure we're not excluding these people. So with all of that in mind, how can we broaden our understanding of inclusivity? Design is the deliverable, but what else should we be thinking about to really make sure that we're including as many people as possible? We can start by understanding the how and why. So can you absorb the wider context before going too deeply into what it does? Understanding what our product or service does is obviously vital to the success of it, but thinking bigger and asking, how does it work? How will people use it? And why will they use it? Could really help provide further context that helps include more people. Users will also bring experiences with them before and after they've experienced your design. So what can we learn from those experiences? You can design the most beautiful walking app that suggests the perfect route for your users, but if it needs to be used in rural areas, then a key requirement will be for it to work with low bandwidth connections. And I think that just really helps to highlight context is key. Another way we can broaden our perspectives is to accept and appreciate that people use things in different ways. And when we start to do this, we can go further than just recognising the barriers that people face. We can start to recognise the motivations that all people have in common and design for those instead. Designing for the most extreme impairments will help to ensure no one is excluded, but the motivations of our users transcend the idea of somebody being limited in some way and aim for a positive outcome for everyone. Being inclusive also starts with changing our perception, and we can do that through being open to continuously learning and improving. You won't and you can't know everything, but you can always know more than you know now. Can you focus on building on what you and your team already know? Because it's also really important to make sure you're doing the right research. And to finish on a positive note, as a research and design community, we have a great opportunity to influence the inclusion of people in our society. There's no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. So let's work together to make a positive change and include everyone. Thank you. So I'm going to pass over to Manuela now to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Gabi. What a nice talk. Very interesting, very insightful. We already have our first question from Nancy. Amazing talk. Thank you so much, Gabi. What standout projects have you worked on that have been centered around inclusive design?
Thank you. So I have worked on a few projects that have been centered on inclusive design. My favourite one and most recent one was a project with Girl Guiding, and we were focusing on how we might improve the experience of volunteering with a disability. So we did lots of contextual research and interviews to really understand how volunteers were affected by their disabilities in their roles. And we researched with people broader than just physical disabilities. So we spoke to people who had mental health impairments and vision impairments. And yeah, we got a lot of insight, and we've helped to kind of shape where they can improve on that. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you. There's no other question at the moment coming in. I hope there are coming a couple more questions. Has someone else a question to Gabi? Maybe I do. I'd like to know, Gabi. So I love your passion for digital inclusivity. So my question is, what made you, or when did you discover actually the passion for it? And you wanted to go for this kind of subject?
That's a good question. I think I've always aimed to kind of help people through my work. And during the pandemic, especially, like I said, I've just kind of been thinking about things critically, I guess, and just wanted to explore a bit more how we might be able to include everyone in our designs, because a lot of stuff like the QR code usage and stuff, I have noticed is very kind of bad design in some ways. You know, it makes a lot of assumptions about what people are doing. So I think it started there, really.
Perfect. So the questions are coming in. I got a question from Iris. Hi, Gabi. Thanks for such an inspiring talk. What do you think is the difference between inclusive design and universal design for digital product systems?
I did read a little bit about this, but I don't think I'm best placed to talk about it, if I'm honest, because I chose to focus on inclusive design. And back when I was studying, I learned a bit about universal design as well. And it seemed like it was more product focused rather than digital. And because my talk was focused on digital, I chose to go down the route of inclusive design. But that is a very good question, and I will try and find out more to think about that.
Thank you for that. Then the next question, it's from Anonymous. What are the outputs of your research on your projects?
Was that the Girl Guiding project? I'm going to presume it was.
Yes.
So it was a discovery project, and we developed, basically we wanted to learn a bit more about how they might improve that experience. So it wasn't so much kind of an output in we designed something, but it was more an output of saying what our recommendations were. So we created a service map which really captured the different people's perspectives and what they'd been through, and that really kind of highlighted what we found out, as well as a report to summarize.
Perfect, thank you. So we get another good question from Rafael. In my feeling, is it correct that one of the major hurdles for inclusion continues to be businesses' willingness to invest in inclusivity? What is the key to convincing them?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and it's something I've thought about. But I think it's becoming increasingly hard to ignore, and actually if we start by gathering the evidence of how many people this is affecting, then maybe businesses will pay a bit more attention, because at the end of the day, if people can't access your service or your product, then you're cutting out potentially a lot of revenue as well.
Cool, thank you. Zoe asks, such an interesting topic, especially for this year, thank you. When we are planning projects in advance, how can we make sure we consider these things in the project?
That's another really good question. So I think when you're planning a research project, it's really important, like you say, to think about these people as early on in the process as you can. And particularly when you're recruiting participants, in the past at Nomensa, we've recruited low digital confidence participants. And I think even if you're testing a website, that's a really, really interesting and insightful experience to go through, because things that we find easy, such as searching for a website on Google, actually isn't that easy to everyone. And I think that kind of inclusion from the beginning of who you include in your research is really important.
Cool, thank you. Then another good question from Emma. How did you get into user experience consultancy?
Good question. So yeah, I studied industrial design back in uni, and that was a lot of kind of exploring of physical product design. And our final project focused a lot on research, and that was really where I learned that I absolutely love research. I love asking questions and finding out the why about products. And from there, really wanted to kind of add the digital side of that in as well. So then found a graduate job at Nemensa, and yeah, learned a lot in the last few years, and it's been a really good experience.
Very interesting path.
Thank you.
New questions from Emily. Great talk, thank you. Have you come across any good examples of inclusive design solutions during COVID-19?
Oh, yeah, actually, so I did write a blog post which covered this a few weeks back now, but I recently went to give blood, and the service wasn't actually much different to how it has been outside of COVID, which was actually quite reassuring. So obviously they've made sure it's absolutely safe. You have to wear a mask and be socially distanced and all the rest of it. But actually they were still kind of taking your name on a piece of paper, and they gave you a booklet to read that they would just wipe down afterwards. And the experience didn't feel like it was using any unnecessary digital touch points, which was quite reassuring. And it was nice to see that the service hadn't changed too much, and it was very much focused on the kind of customer service they were giving you, which, yeah, it was definitely inclusive.
So the next question is coming, which is a challenge to me because I don't know how to pronounce the name. So I think it will just read out the question. Our question: to what digital solution reduce the necessary investment and development in analog solution?
Sorry, would you be able to repeat that, please?
Will our progression towards digital solution reduce the necessary investment and development in analog solutions?
I think so. I think there's learnings from both sides, and obviously coming from an industrial design background and using the typewriter as an example, I think there's so many learnings from kind of analog solutions that we can apply to digital, but also digital has really good lessons in analog designs as well. And when you think about service design, it's all very intertwined, in my opinion.
Good answer. So Leah is asking, thanks Gabi, you mentioned Microsoft's toolkit. Are there other tools or techniques you have found useful for research in this area?
Oh, that is another very good question. I'm not sure about tools as such, but there's lots of good resources online, and I've used them to obviously help shape what I'm talking about today. Yeah, I don't know about tools. That's a very good question. Not that I've come across, to be honest. I think it is something that we all need to get better at, and maybe that's why I feel like there are lots of tools, and maybe why I've referred to Microsoft quite a lot, because they do seem to be a leader in this field at the minute.
Cool, thank you. Another one from Anonymous. I'm working at the startup and we simply don't have the financial resources to design for everyone. Do you have tips to be as inclusive as possible?
Yeah, so I'm sure that's a challenge a lot of people are facing. And my advice would be, if you're doing research, then try and include kind of different types of people in your research and really be active in that, rather than just accepting kind of the same kind of people. Is there any kind of not paid for research you can do? So secondary research to, again, get the evidence behind kind of the case of why this is really important. Because I think if you're going with evidence, then it becomes obvious why this is so important, and maybe it should be more of a priority.
Cool. I really love the next question. Do you think companies are more focused on physical accessibility inclusion than digital? And do you think recent COVID lockdowns have pushed companies to consider digital inclusion more?
Ooh, two questions.
Good question, yeah.
Sorry, could you just say the first one again?
The first one, do you think companies are more focused on physical accessibility inclusion than digital?
Yeah, so that's an interesting point. I think, like I mentioned, it's sometimes easier for us to understand physical barriers. So I don't know if they think it's more important, but I think it's quite a different thing for us to think about compared to maybe digital accessibility. Um, and yeah, it's easier for us, for example, with the bus example, to imagine what it's like to get on a bus with a wheelchair. And that's something that we quite, have to pay attention to, whereas maybe mental health issues go a bit more ignored. Um, so yeah, I'm not sure on that. I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. And then what was the second bit, sorry?
The second one is, and do you think recent COVID lockdown have pushed companies to consider digital inclusion more?
I would argue against that. I think it's probably less because they're just trying to do the bare minimum. They've already had to, adapt in so many other ways. It's probably not a priority to think about minority groups, unfortunately. And that doesn't mean that that's okay. But I guess if you've got limited time and resources to make sure that you're making things work for a large amount of people, then it's maybe not where their focus has been. But now we're going through a second lockdown. Hopefully they've got that kind of MVP part sorted and they can start focusing on including people and making it better now.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Gabi. I'm sure you have put a lot of people into thinking about this speech and they're like being more aware of digital inclusivity. Oh, I just see there's another questions coming in. Let's have this one also answered. Hi, Gabi. I'm an industrial design graduate thinking of pursuing UX design next year. Could you share your experience of your transition? I think we did a little bit similar in the beginning, but maybe if you can.
Yeah, maybe if they missed it. So yeah, I obviously studied industrial design at Loughborough and it was a really amazing course. And there I learned that I really love research. So at Nemenza we have UX consultancy roles and UX designer roles. And for me, I was more interested in the kind of researchy side, which was what the consultant role was. And yeah, that's definitely what my role has been. So I do a lot of UX research and really digging into the why and asking people questions and things. So yeah, I definitely recommend it. I think it's a really kind of good transition from industrial design because for me, I didn't really like doing the CAD and the 3D modeling and everything. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it was really inspiring, this session. I really enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gabi. I just want to tell everyone next session will be at 2 p.m. Amsterdam time, 1 p.m. London time. In this talk, Emma Polly, also Nemenza's own senior user experience consultant, will talk about investigate and protect, how we research with vulnerable people. Amber will share her process for protecting both yourself and your participants when taking on difficult subjects. She explores ways not only to ensure you deliver effective research, but also to ensure you create a safe space. So I'm really looking forward to that speech as well. If you haven't signed up, please, there's still time to do so. Do it on Eventbrite, as we have repeated saying it to everybody. There's still time for every session to get signed up. So we have come to this session. Thank you very much. See you all at 2 p.m. and have a good time. Bye.